think critically and non-literally. This was not consistent with the journey of Jesus. Jesus was just the opposite. Jesus welcomed ambiguity. Jesus was comfortable with contradiction and often embraced paradox. Jesus would say things like, if you want to live, you have to die. If you want to be great, you have to be a servant. If you want to be rich, you have to be poor. If you want to get, you have to give. If you want to be first, you have to be last. If you want to be honored, you have to be humble. If you want life, you have to surrender. If you want to be strong, you have to be weak. If you want to gain, you have to lose. If you want to lead, you have to serve. Be joyful in your tribulation. That's counterintuitive. But Jesus really messes us up here as he causes us to look carefully on the Sermon on the Mount. He attempts to set the record straight by talking to us about the law and his relationship to it. So Jesus redresses the commonly contorted and distorted view of the law. He rejects the Pharisaical interpretations of the law. He addresses murder and adultery and divorce and oaths and retaliation and love. Matthew chapter 5 and verse 19, Jesus says, whoever then breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same shall be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. Did you hear what I said? Notice Jesus said that they would be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. Now, I know that's difficult because there are Seventh-day Adventists who believe and teach that if you do not keep the Sabbath or other commandments, that you will be lost. Amen. Walls. That's not a biblical truth. Jesus goes on to say, in the B clause, but whoever keeps and teaches them, that's the law, he or she shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I say unto you, unless your righteousness surpasses and exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will not enter into the kingdom of heaven. That is to say that the superfluous, superior judgment of others as if we are sinless, that judgment could keep us out, even though we think we're in. Jesus sets out to redefine the law. So, in a counter-cultural, counterintuitive manner, Jesus talks about murder. And in each of these verbs, they're in the imperative, which means they're non-negotiable and they're simply commands. And Jesus says, if you're angry at your brother or angry at anyone without a cause, that's murder. If you call another raka, that's stupid, idiot, good for nothing, that's murder. Now, I know I'm guilty of that. Especially as I look during this election season at some of the ridiculous things that some of the candidates are saying, I'm almost forced to say one of those things. I thought two people would say amen to that. And Jesus went on to say, if you call another fool, that's murder. You're in danger of the hellfire. Jesus goes on to say, when you bring your gift, ask the question, what is the gift? When you bring your gifts, that is your praise, your worship, your prayer, your offering to the altar, and you get to the altar and discover that you have unforgiveness, bitterness, resentment, and unreconciled differences, Jesus says, leave the altar, leave the church, don't return to praise, worship, and prayer until you work it out. The nerve of us thinking that our praise and our worship and our prayer and our offerings are meaningful when we are harboring unforgiveness in our hearts. Jesus goes on to talk about adultery And Jesus said, look, I got to expand this thing because you guys have been looking at this very narrowly. So if you look at somebody with lust in your eyes, that's how we look at brothers, Beyonce, when she's doing her thing. See, y'all real religious in here. Ain't nobody saying amen. Sisters, when you look at Morris Chestnut, see the sisters be real with theirs. The brothers, the brothers trying to be too holy. You could even be walking down the street, or perhaps something more sinister as a male stripper or a lap dancer, or the viewing of pornographic movies or literature or even R-rated movies. Jesus is saying that's adultery. See, we got to be careful about judging people, because Jesus says, the same splinter that we're trying to identify in somebody else's eye, what he says, a big beam in our own eyes. Yes? So Jesus says, listen, if the eye offends you, cut it off, cut it out, pluck it out. And if the hand offends you, get rid of it. Because it would be better to go to hell with, one eye, or to live with one eye and one hand, yes, than to go to hell. Then he talks about divorce. And he says divorce on any other ground other than sexual immorality, the person has committed adultery. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, Jesus broadened their interpretation. But our interpretation has certainly evolved as we have now come to understand that if someone demonstrates incessant abuse, he or she has immorally divorced the marriage covenant. Am I right about it? Yeah, when somebody's beating you up and beating you up and beating you up, where is the covenant there? Yeah. Some folks have been married for years, but yet divorced emotionally, spiritually, and intimately. Just staying together to stay in office or to stay in good standing. Jesus is prompting us to transcend the legalistic interpretations and application of divorce in favor of an interpretation that embraces the spirit of what it means to be married. Jesus talks about swearing and oaths and cussing and using God's name in vain, verbal offenses to God, breaking and making sacred promises to God and humanity, lying and perjury and self-deception and breaches of sacred agreements made with God. Truthfully, we are all fallible humans, and because we're fallible humans, we get into fallible contracts, and sometimes we cannot fully execute those contracts. Am I right about it? Jesus then talks about retaliation. And he says, you have heard it said at old times that an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Martin Luther King Jr. suggested that the application of this Mosaic doctrine would render the society lame, toothless, and ineffective. Jesus said, if someone slaps you on the right cheek, turn so that they can slap you on the left cheek. When was the last time you did that? In fact, somebody said, let him do it again. I'll get my knife out and cut him, right? Jesus says, if anyone wants to sue you, don't defend yourself. Forget about Jacoby and Myers and Johnny Cochran and Larry H. Parker and Parker Stanley and